I want to welcome to the program from the Heritage Foundation, Theodore Broman. Theodore, how you doing, sir?
Really good. Great to be with you and your listeners.
Listen, it's great to have you here. You had a piece yesterday that we mentioned on the program why the U.S. should be concerned about the domestic effects of the UN Arms Trade Treaty. Now, we know that the United Nations is going to be having this big summit next summer. This is a program that they've been working on for a long time. I remember going up to the United Nations back in 2004 as they started work on this arms trade treaty. And all along, they have said that we don't have anything to worry about because we're not the target or the subject of this arms trade treaty. This is actually, trying to go after, armed groups in Africa and Southeast Asia. But no, it's not about hunters. It's not about sportsmen here in the United States. You say that's not exactly the case.
Well, I think there's some reasons that we should be concerned about this arms trade treaty. And as I pointed in my paper, one reason that I'm concerned about it is precisely because all the UN documentation is secret. If you go to the UN site, you take a look at the official arms trade treaty site, you'll see that they say simply that, quote, the chair's non-papers have been circulated to all delegates. That's the end of the documentation. Now, I managed to get my hands on the draft text of this treaty, which is footnoted in the paper that I've written, from a supportive non-governmental organization that is a pro-gun control organization.
Mm-hmm.
And in reading this draft treaty text, I became concerned for a number of reasons.
All right. Why don't you tell us what jumped out at you, Ted?
Well, one thing that jumps out is that the U.S. position on the arms trade treaty is that it shouldn't include hunting weapons. Unfortunately, the draft text of the treaty makes it clear that hunting weapons are included, sporting weapons are included, personal protection weapons are included. Really anything from rifle scopes to bullets up to battleships is included in this treaty. And it doesn't just cover those things. It covers everything that could be used to make those items as well. And that's another reason I'm very concerned, because this treaty has got an enormously broad scope. And if you were to try to enforce it in the United States, you'd have to massively expand federal authority, not just covering firearms, but covering ammunition, covering manufacturing items, covering transport, covering a whole range of things that right now the government has very little to do with. I think that's a bad treaty and potentially a dangerous treaty. But I'd add one more item that I find particularly discouraging. The draft treaty requires nations to, quote, maintain records of all imports and shipments of arms that transit their territory, and suggests that these records should contain information about end users, that is, the people who actually end up owning the firearms in question. So what we have here is a suggestion that the best way to comply with this treaty would be to set up an international gun registry for, at a minimum, all firearms that are either imported into or transit across the United States. And that covers a lot of things.
Yeah.
Now, I go into some other things in my paper, but those, I think, are the things that people should be the most concerned about.
And as you talk about some of these problems, like, for instance, the incomplete documentation, I mean, here we are, we're a few months away from this summit, a process that began, as I mentioned, years and years ago, and yet they're still not willing to come forward with what this treaty is going to look like. I remember the last go-round of meetings, you talked about the hunting rifle issue. I think it was the Canadian delegation that actually stood up and said, all right, well, if this isn't about, the guns that hunters and sportsmen own, well, why don't we just exempt hunting rifles? And you would have thought that they had said, why don't we just set the treaty on fire? The response was, well, no, we can't do that. It would completely undercut the purpose and the scope of this treaty. So we know that they want to go after the types of firearms that law-abiding Americans own. We know that they don't want to exempt them. Ultimately, we know that an international arms trade treaty that the United States would be expected to sign on to would have an impact on gun owners in the United States. It's absurd to think otherwise.
Well, there's simply no way that a treaty of this scope, covering everything, as I've said, from bullets up to battleships, is not going to affect people in the United States. And when you take a look at what these gun control advocates say when they talk about the arms trade treaty abroad, and I'll have a blog on this for the Foundry, that is the Heritage blog, tomorrow. When you take a look at what they say about the arms trade treaty abroad, you see that they say things that are just a little bit different than what they say in the United States. If you take a look at what they say in India, for example, they say that the arms trade treaty will contribute to domestic disarmament. If you take a look at what they say when they write about the Arms Trade Treaty in big reports that they produce in Geneva, they complain about increasing civilian possession of firearms around the world. And then you take a look at what they say in the United States, and of course they say, well, this isn't about anything domestic at all. This is just about international trade. So I don't think these folks really recognize that Google is out there and exists and it works. And you can actually look up what they're saying in India. You can look up what they're saying in Switzerland. And, I'm sure this will come as a shock to you and your listeners, but it doesn't match up to what they say in America. So I think we always have to ask these folks, what do you mean? Do you mean what you say in New York, or do you mean what you say in Geneva?
One of the other interesting aspects of this is that, this big summit is going to play out right in the midst of the 2012 presidential election. Obviously, President Obama has been trying to demonstrate, I think, to little avail, that he doesn't pose any threat to the Second Amendment. Now, you can look at the Supreme Court appointments that he's made and things of that nature. Like I said, I don't buy it, but this is going to be really interesting to see how the Obama campaign plays this. If you can't not speak out on one side or the other about this arms trade treaty, but as you say, if there are so many problems for American gun owners, is this an issue that President Obama is going to really want to highlight just a few months before Election Day?
Well, I've spoken to some people who are involved in the drafting of this treaty, and they're very clear that one reason this treaty was pushed forward with so much vigor was that they figured that President Obama's first term was probably their best shot at securing an American signature on this treaty. Now, you take a look at the number of senators, Democrats and Republicans, who have signed letters warning the administration about signing an arms trade treaty that has anything to do with the Second Amendment, and you'll come up with 60 senators, 45 Republicans, and 15 Democrats. Now, it's obvious that a treaty that has got 60 senators opposed to it is not going to get through the United States Senate. They're not even close on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the real question is, will the administration sign the treaty and then simply punt it into a corner and take credit for signing among people who care about it and hope no one else pays attention? Or will they stick to their red line of no firearms included and walk away at the last minute? Now, your guess on that is as good as mine, but the crunch is going to come probably in mid-July up in New York, when the administration is going to be faced with this option. Sign on to a treaty that you don't like, and it's going to look bad and dangerous, and the Senate will never accept, or walk away and disappoint a lot of people around the world, and undoubtedly some in the United States, who are really enthusiastic about this treaty. It's going to be a tough call for them.
Ted Broman with the Heritage Foundation joining us on Cam and Company. And Ted, thanks again for your time, sir. Great talking to you. Hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Good to be with you and your listeners.
Have a great evening, sir.
Thank you.